Why do you think that somebody wanted to have Martin Luther King killed? Certainly, your brother had no reason to do it. He wasn't anti-black. He wasn't involved in the civil rights movement in any method. He certainly wasn't a racist at all. Why do you think they wanted to have King killed? And why did they pick your brother as the patsy?
Well, see, if you, and I'm sure you did, I'm coming off a bad cold. I guess you can probably tell by my voice. But if you checked up and followed the news like most Americans did, Hoover had a terrible hatred for Dr. King. I think he hated all blacks. And he called him the most notorious liar. And he sent him a thing that he was going to expose him and that suicide was the only way out. And James never did say anything about any blacks or done anything, and it was all the FBI and Hoover. And I know Murtaugh, an FBI agent in Atlanta, he testified that when King got shot, he said the FBI celebrated in Atlanta FBI office, and one jumped 2 feet off the floor and said, "We finally got the SOB." And so they was all celebrating. Then they blamed it all off on James.
Well, basically, it's a terrible tragedy and a great injustice. And really, because you tell the whole story. Now, who was Raoul? I mean, basically, we hear about Raoul, and you actually almost got in touch with him, didn't you?
Yeah, I went down to New Orleans. See, James didn't trust the attorneys because he couldn't trust Foreman after, Foreman. Then his first attorney was Arthur Haynes, and anything he told Arthur Haynes, he'd tell the book writer William Bradford Huey. So he'd give me information. I would check it out for him. And one time when he was the Mustang he had, he found a card in there after somebody used it, and him and Raoul used it, and it had a card in there. R. Rosenson was the name of it, and so James would hang at the Bunny Lounge there on Canal Street in New Orleans. So he sent me down there, and I went and checked it out. In fact, he sent me down there twice, and I finally found out R. Rosenson was Randolph Rosenson. Then I kept checking things out. And he was actually from Miami, Florida. He wasn't from New Orleans. And I went down there and I got one of them cameras where I could take a picture and find out where he lived at. And James said that was him. That wasn't Raoul. But he met this guy before at the Bunny Lounge, And so we was trying to run it down ourselves because we can't check it with the FBI. And the attorneys and that, they are all on the other side. And so we just had to kind of work together. And I found out later that Randolph Rosenson was subpoenaed to testify in Washington from the Assassination Committee. But they had two things there. They had the secret testimony where everything was secret. I testified to that. Plus, and then they had the live testimony where the newspaper covered it. I'll testify at both of them. But Rosenson just testified at the secret one, so nobody would know what he testified about.
And so basically, basically Raoul was the man. He was sort of like James Earl Ray's handlers. I obviously had him come back to Tennessee on the correct day. He told him where to rent a room. He told him to buy the rifle. And James Earl Ray was the patsy for this whole thing. Of course, when he realized that he was the man that we were going after, then of course he fled because he knew that they would come after him for the murder of King, which he didn't do. Well, Dr. Stan, back here at the Genesis Communication Network. Our guest is Jerry Ray. We're talking about his book, A Memoir of Injustice, the story certainly of James Earl Ray and how he was framed for the murder of Martin Luther King. Somebody wanted King dead, and they needed a patsy, and of course they needed the complete support of the intelligence networks, which they had, and of course the media, which they had, and of the justice system, which tragically they had. And they sent a man who is not guilty to prison. They sent a woman who would testify that the evidence against James Earl Ray was fraudulent. They sent her to a psychiatric hospital and kept her there 9 years. They would have left her there the rest of her life. And, of course, there's so many stories here that you'll never hear elsewhere. Of course, the book was co-written by Tamara Carter, and we talked to Tamara the other day. Now, James, you have a website, or how can people get your book?
I don't have no website myself, but they can get the book at Barnes & Noble Bookstore or Borders Bookstore, or on the internet they can get it at Amazon.com, Target.com, or TRINEDAY.com.
All right, fine. Well, we think it's an important book. Now, if you're out there in the listening audience, you have a question for Jerry Ray, our telephone number, 1-800-259-5791, 1-800-259-5791. And this really is the story of the whole background of Jerry, his life, and then of James and his life, and then of course the tragic situation that developed, and certainly how he was simply framed. He was framed because they wanted to get rid of King. They needed a patsy. They always do this sort of thing. They always have the person set up, whether it be Lee Harvey Oswald, Saran, of course, not that Saran wasn't involved, but he didn't fire. There were actually 13 shots fired. There was only eight shots in Saran's gun. The bullet that killed Bobby Kennedy came from behind, about an inch behind the right ear, and Saran was in front about 3 feet, and none of his bullets ever hit Sidney Bobby Kennedy. All the bullets that killed him came from behind. Understand, ladies and gentlemen, that nothing is as it appears to be, and this is the great tragedy of modern times. Our number, 1-800-259-5791, if you have a question or comment. And Jerry, what sort of response are you getting to your book, and what's the message you really want people to understand in your book, A Memoir of Injustice?
Well, I haven't gotten a report yet from T. Carter just how the book was going over. From what from early parts, it went over good, but later on we'll get a more of a definite report. But my thing is, I'm trying to get out that the people try to make James out of racist, and then they try and act like, the King family was this and that. But the King family has been our closest ally, and because, as you know, Dexter went and visited James and came out and told him he didn't believe that James was guilty. Then I met Cred and Dexter several times, and so that's the reason I dedicate the book, like I say, to not only James Earl, but also to Dr. King, because they're both innocent victims of a crime, and so that's why it was dedicated that way. And so I just wanted to get the truth out. And I can't do nothing for James because he's dead, or Dr. King, he's dead. But it's not too late to get the truth out. It'll be hard to do because you're fighting the government and the state, and you're fighting all these big guys, and you feel just like a little nothing. But you still you have to keep trying.
I was really fascinated that at the end, certainly it was obvious that your brother was dying. They offered to let him go home and die, at home, as long as he would confess to the fact that he committed the assassination, and he held out to the very end. He said, I didn't. Why would I admit I did it? Which meant he would die in jail, but they offered to let him out if he'd just confess. They were just so interested. I thought it was fascinating.
they had offered to let him out back in the late 70s and let him go back to Jefferson City if he would have met Representative Sawyer. That's when the assassination committee was going on, and he turned that down. Then I was present. Me and Dr. Pepper, Attorney Pepper, was present. They had the Memphis detectives and everybody there. They was interviewing James. This is when he was on his deathbed. This is when they knew he had not over a year to live. And they had come out and inspected my home and said they approved he could come and live with me until he he died. And they said if you will admit that you killed Dr. King, we'll let you die outside with your brother Jerry. And James said, I'd rather die in here. And he said, I love to be outside, but he said, I'll never admit to something I didn't do.
And ladies and gentlemen, this is the length that they would go to try to get an admission. Why? Because they can't let the American people know that they kill people they don't like. And they did not like Martin Luther King. Not that, of course, they didn't like what he'd done for civil rights, because, of course, whether you believe in the civil rights movement or not, certainly what it did was to centralize power in Washington, D.C., and that's what the establishment wants. It's all about power, circumventing the Constitution. Yes, there was injustice. Yes, something needed to be done. But the solution was not to centralize all power in Washington, D.C., but it was to try to get this thing straightened out at the state levels, and it was getting straightened out at the state level. But then Martin Luther King, of course, came out against the Vietnam War, and of course the establishment wanted to continue the war and continue the killing, and Martin Luther King was far more certainly significant as a dead martyr than as a live crusader against the injustice of Vietnam, especially since we were financing the North Vietnamese during the war, because after all, if you didn't finance the North Vietnamese and you didn't have an enemy, how could you keep the war going? Well, our number is 1-800-259-5791. 1-800-259-5791. The book, A Memoir of Injustice, and certainly one of the things that's really so impressive is that so many of the judges who heard the case or knew about the details of the case, so many of the judges said, well, Martin Luther King, there's certainly no evidence here that James Earl Ray was guilty. There was really no evidence, was there?
No, there wasn't. There wasn't not one piece. See, what they was mainly trying to say, as I was saying earlier, that the gun that James had bought that Raoul had him to buy in Birmingham, I think it was Birmingham where he bought the gun at, and he took it to Memphis, and Raoul picked it up. They was trying to say that was a gun, that James bought that gun and went to Memphis and shot Dr. King. Well, Raoul had picked it up the night before, and when James was staying at the Rebel Motel. And Dr. Pepper and them got suspicious of that, and because they was believed that was a throwdown gun, because they knew that would lead back to James Earl. And so they want to have it tested, and the state and the government didn't want to test it. And why wouldn't they want to test it if it would prove that James Earl, the gun he bought, was used in assassination? And they was fighting to keep it from being tested, and James and Pepper was fighting to get it tested. And so Judge Joe Brown ordered a testing, and it came back inconclusive. But the people that did the test said on CNN, if they was pressed, if they had to make it an answer, they would say it wasn't a gun.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in just a minute. If you have a question, give us a call.